the conversation you're about to hear, Campbell elaborates on a few of his favorite subjects, such as the relevance or irrelevance of Eastern-style gurus for Western seekers, and the underlying tension between Eastern spiritual wisdom and what he saw as the authentic Western spirit, namely, truth attained through the individual's own path. Campbell also offers us an intimate look at his relationship with famed psychologist Carl Jung and Heinrich Zimmer, who also exerted a tremendous influence on him. And we'll hear his thoughts on humanity's modern relationship with the natural world and the role of myth in restoring that relationship. This conversation took place in the spring of 1979, when Joseph was 75 years old. We enter the conversation speaking about the dualities at work in human life. My stepson happens to be taking a world history class, and his group was studying Peru. I kind of got an opportunity to recover my own interest in Peruvian and South America culture and so forth, and just again looked at the devastation that the Spaniards wrought when they came to America, destroying these cultures, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayans. And there was a scene that is related where the friar that had accompanied Pizarro on his expedition showed Atahualpa the Bible. This is God. And Atahualpa couldn't deal with it. It wasn't that, how could God be in this material object? It was so beautiful, the message that was there. And I guess the reason I brought that up is just the nature of conflict perhaps is related to that inability to go beyond the mind, to recognize the connection that we all have, and somehow we get in the way of that by saying, this is mine and that's not yours.
That's right. But then the opposite problem comes up when one becomes too strongly linked to the commonality and losing touch with one's own individuality, because part of our loyalty to life is being loyal to our own lives, not sacrificing oneself, but letting oneself play in relation to the other in a prudent and positive way.
Striking the balance, as the Buddha said, the middle path.
Well, yes, and there's a little verse from the Rig Veda that I'm very much attached to, of the tree of life and two birds on the tree, fast friends. One eats the fruit of the tree, and the other, not eating, watches. And those are two aspects of ourselves. And one, we eat the fruit of the tree. We kill a life in order to eat it, and we win, and we play the world of action. But then in contemplation, you see, as the meditative one, we are removed from the destiny of the one who is killing and winning and losing. I think of a tennis match where on the court one is on one side of the net, and there wouldn't be a game if one didn't play that game hard, against the other one. But also there is the referee who doesn't care who wins. And a good sport is one who can hold both positions. You're playing the game as hard as you can, but you're a good loser. Do you see what I mean?
Sure.
And it's those two positions, the general one that looks at the duality of the field. You mustn't say that should not be, because if it wasn't there wouldn't be any life. And yet you participate on one side. That's part of participating in life. That's part of the participation in the sorrows of life, the cruelties of life, and all that. There's a Buddhist formula for the bodhisattva, for the one who has illumination but determines to remain in the world. All life is sorrowful. So the bodhisattva participates with joy in the sorrows of the world, suffering himself in the world. This is the crucified one who came to be crucified. The crucifixion is not something that should not have happened. That's something that must happen. The participation in the sorrows, it's an important concept.
Part of life.
Yeah.
Joseph, I want to publicly acknowledge you for editing this marvelous book called The Portable Jung. It's an incredible selection of the works of Jung, and I think anyone can pick it up and get a fairly good idea of where Jung was coming from. And it gives me an opportunity to ask you I know that Jung has had an effect on your own work and your own life, and I'd like to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, my first interest in the world that I'm interested in was in mythology. It grabbed me when I was very young, and one mythology after another took over. And when I was a student then, a graduate student in Germany, back in 28, 29, I discovered for myself the works of Freud and Jung. And this opened up a psychological dimension in a field that I had no knowledge of in those terms. And suddenly I realized why the subject was interesting to me, and a lot of new mysteries and wonders came through. Now, Jung was not known very well in the United States at that time. I think there were 2 small translations of works that he had published. Freud was well known, only I had not been a student of psychology and didn't know Freud. So both of these men began to talk to me, you might say, and inform me about one aspect of my own subject. I now realize that one aspect of the subject is the psychological mystery, and the other aspect is the historical and ethnographical side of the show. So on the psychological side, these 2 men played back and forth in my thinking. When I did The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which was back in the 40s, middle and early 40s, they were a sort of equal in my thinking, and Freud served in one context and Jung in another aspect of my interpretation of myths. But then the years following that book, Jung became more and more eloquent to me. I think the longer you live, the more Jung can say to you. And I go back to him, and things that I've read are saying new things. Freud never says a new thing to me anymore. It always comes out, Oedipus and a few things like that, and I got bored with that. And my feeling is that Freud tells us what myths mean to neurotics, and Jung gives us a clue to how to let the myth talk to us in its own terms without putting a formula on it. And so I've been with Jung, you might say, now, since 1928. That's a long, long spell. Yeah. And as I say, he means more and more and more to me. Now, for me, he's not the final word at all. I don't think there is a final word. But he has opened me up to prospects and vistas that are of his work. Now, there's one other thing. In my life came Heinrich Zimmer, who was a great Indologist and a genius with respect to the interpretation of symbols. And he is, in my mind, supplementary to Jung. They were close friends for the last years of Zimmer's life. In fact, Jung edited Zimmer's German of Postuma, as I edited Zimmer's English. So when I met Jung, we were, co-editors. Zimmer was kind of nice. And so those 2 men are the ones that talked to me.
You had personal interaction with Carl Jung. What was he like as a person?
Oh, this was a magnificent man. And he was no Herr Doctor professor. He was playing it all the time. And we did not talk about subjects in which he was an authority, We were ad-libbing rather a fresh conversation. It was just a tea that my wife and I had with Dr. Jung and Mrs. Jung at Bollingen, which is his place on the Lake of Zurich, at the other end of the lake from Zurich itself. That marvelous little castle he built with his own hands, that stone thing on the lake. We were greeted when we arrived and sat there by the lake in genial, easy conversation. He was a big, magnificent man, and my wife tells me that his eyes were very attractive. It was fun.
Yeah. Have you, in your own studies of mythology, verified any of, the collective unconscious is one thing. Have you found that to be a motif throughout mythology?
What are you going to do with the fact that the same motifs appear everywhere? They do. There's a constellation of motifs, basic motifs in mythology, that are fundamental. How do you explain it? It's come from the same zone as dreams. So the individual dreams in your dream won't be like mine, let's say. But here we come to a level of what might be called racial dreams, the myths. And they match. And the word collective unconscious, or you might say general unconscious, is a term just to recognize that fact, and that there is a common humanity built into our nervous system out of which our imagination works. The appeal of these constants is very deep, generally human. Now, the explanation that is often given in the Freudian circles of individual experiences, being the source of dream, biography, not biology, you see, and different racial histories being the source of their myths, that won't explain it. That just won't. It doesn't fit. It may say something about a certain inflection or aspect or peculiar thing about this particular mythology is against that one. Why does this group have one god, and that god is the god of their little society, with them as the special people, and this group doesn't think that way. Their deities have to do with the world of nature, What is it gives those different pitches to these different culture systems? That's special history and biography. But what about the general humanity? We all have, you can recognize a human being no matter where you see him. And so he must have the same kind of nervous system, basically. Therefore, his imagination must work out of a comparable base. And so what's so damn mystical about all that? That's just seems to me to be obvious. And that's what the term collective unconscious is supposed to cover.
Joseph, you're always a delight. I get carried away on clouds of my own imagination as I listen to you. Jungian psychology, it does seem to be a little more open than other more traditional forms or other traditional forms of psychology.
For some people, Jungian is a nasty word, and this has been flung at me by certain reviewers as though it just said, well, don't bother with Joe Campbell, he's a Jungian. I'm not a Jungian. As far as interpreting myths, Jung gives me the best clues I've got. But I'm much more interested in diffusion and relationships historically than Jung was, do you see? Very, very much. So that the Jungians think of me as a kind of questionable person. And I don't use those formula words very often in my interpretation of myths, but it gives me the background from which to let the myth talk to myself. But Zimmer, I think, was my final guru, you might say, the one that really gave me the courage to interpret myths out of what I knew of their common symbols and so forth and so on. There's always a risk there, but it's the risk of one's own personal adventure, you might say, instead of just gluing yourself to what someone else found.
You brought up my next subject by mentioning Heinrich Zimmer as one of your gurus.
Yes.
That is the emergence of other cultural traditions, other forms into our own culture,
yes.
Namely this one, and the appearance of gurus, the appearance of teachers
yes.
from other traditions, other religious forms. And I know that your own work has been influenced heavily by Buddhism and Hinduism and the models and the myths that are there. Mm-hmm. And you've done a beautiful job of translating them in a number of your books. Mm-hmm. What do you think of this transmigration of cultures as we see the East come to the West? And we hear the word synthesis, we hear the word of East and West coming together. How do you see that? And what do you think is the vision for the future of that? Are we moving towards something new, or are we going to synthesize the best from the East, the best from the West, and create something new, or are we going to go with old models? How's it going to happen?
Well, I don't think there can be a general synthesis of East and West, but there can be special syntheses in different places. I think what the West absorbs from the East is going to be one thing. What the East absorbs from the West is going to be something else, and it will differ from region to region. The Chinese are not going to want the same things that the Indians want. I don't mean only want, but need in the way of spiritual food from the West. The West has spiritual food to give, and a lot of it, not just gadgets, And now I can't talk about what's happening in India because I'm not an Indian, and I look at it from outside, or China or Japan, although I'm very fond of the Japanese situation, and I admire enormously what they're doing with our Western things, but they're still Japanese. Now, I can say something about the East coming to the West, particularly in the field of religions and mythology. Our Western systems, from way back, but particularly from the 4th century in the period of Theodosius, have been institutionalized. Our mythologies are institutionalized, and salvation comes from membership in an institution. You see this sign all over New York subways, go to church, read the Bible. Well, that has to do with one definition of a religious life. You can't find it in yourself. You find it only through the church. The East, these men from the East come, whether they are Indians or Japanese or Tibetans, and they tell us the real mystery is in yourself. Well, we have that in our tradition. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Who's in heaven? God's in heaven. Where's God? Within you. That's not what the church advertises, you might say. God is in the tabernacle, or the church or something like that. And this thing that the Orient is bringing is a realization of the inward way. When you sit in meditation with your hands in your lap looking down, that means you've gone in. And you're coming not just to a soul that is disengaged from God, you're coming to the divine mystery right there in yourself. That's what the East is teaching us. That was in the Christian tradition. And we find it in the Gospel according to Thomas, which has been dug up out of the Egyptian desert, in 1948. But it has been pushed out. The mystical, the truly mystical, finding of the divine, not only within you, but within all things, is not favored by traditions. These are institutional religions. And I think the big thing that the Orient is bringing to us, the mysteries inside yourself. And that's that saying from the old Chandogya Upanishad from about the 9th or even perhaps 10th centuries BC, Tattvamasi, you are it. That divine mystery that you seek to know is the very source of your own life. It is the being of your beings, and find it within.
So there's the mythical attraction, and at the same time, we see gurus gathering disciples about them, and people essentially, changing perhaps their lifestyle, their habit of clothing, etc., and in following a master or teacher, a guru. How about that?
Well, there are two responses, quite natural, I think, to the guru. When anyone becomes a model for you, you tend automatically to imitate him. Little boys imitate their fathers. It's darling to see a little boy walks just like his father, some little kid like that. And this is the spontaneous identification. It's through that identification that something's developing in you. So that's the first phase, let's say. But the second phase is to find your own self. And I think the wearing, for instance, of Oriental clothes, or even assuming of Oriental names, this is not correct. It's displacing you again. You see, you have mistaken the clothing for the message. And not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, is going to get to the kingdom of heaven. Not everyone who wears a turban is a released spirit. So that's one way to get caught again. Then you mistake a certain attitude or manner of looking and life and living, and even such things as food taboos and all that, picking up all that stuff. That has nothing to do with the spiritual life. I've heard of a couple of Roshis over here whose first statement is, if you want illumination, you've got to be an American, not a Japanese. I mean, to make believe you're Japanese is just to run off on a detour and get stuck in the woods. It's not in the manner of dress, as on speech. It's in the manner of experience and illumination. So I think the guru thing, it can be a delusion, but everything can be a delusion thing. You got to get it the right way. And the thing about the guru in the West is that he represents an alien principle of the spirit, namely that you don't follow your own path, you follow a given path. The great guru in the traditional culture assumes the moral responsibility for his student's life. He tells him what he's to do. My God, that's totally contrary to the Western spirit. And our spirituality is that of the individual quest, the individual realization, authenticity in your life out of your own center. You see? That's not Oriental. So one has to take this message from the East, assimilate it to one's own dimension and to one's own thrust of life, not get pulled off. And wearing an Oriental costume is the first sign of pulled off the track. You're following someone else's path.
Joseph, a famous statement is, in wildness is the preservation of the world. And it's just occurring to me as we're talking, the connection that I always feel, and all of us feel, when we get in touch with nature and wildness and the wilderness. And I go back to when we were talking about the cities and how in the city, most cities, nature is removed. It's not there anymore. And so much of mythology deals with human beings' connection with the earth, with nature, with the environment around us. And to some extent, perhaps our environmental problems of today are partly due to the fact we've gotten out of touch with the environment we live in. I want you to talk about just the relationship of environment through mythology to...
Well, you have to think first and realize first that the human being is a biological phenomenon himself. He's a product of nature. And he has this body, which is like the body of the grass or the trees, a product of this good earth. And on the other hand, in contrast to the trees and the grasses and the little bugs, he has this great brain up here, which has a structuring character that is not that of nature. It has its own almost mathematical kind of thinking. Rational thinking is, let's say, rectangular, whereas the body thinking is circular. These are the two kinds of consciousness that are right in us. One is that which the Indians call the Vijnanamaya Kosha, the sheath of wisdom, the wisdom that's digesting our meals, and that brings the grass up, and that we share with the whole world of nature. But then there's this Manomaya Kosha, this intelligence of the brain, which has plans for how life should be. And it's not always the way life wants to be. So there's a conflict between these two worlds. I think of it really in the way of the city, particularly a city like New York. San Francisco is a little different because on these hills you can see the nature world, But in New York you're in those canyons. And when you see the moon over New York City, you just are amazed. There's another nature world. So the mind may be very well at home in New York, but the body, the other support to the mind, which is the nature, our biology, is out of accord with that. And then you go out into even Westchester County, just a suburb area, and you begin to feel, the body says, here's where I belong. These are my friends. Now, the tendency in our culture, you see, is to be more and more of this mathematical organization instead of the organic. And the interaction between these two is what keeps us civilized and harmonious human beings. Now, the two things to be said. One is in wilderness is the salvation. Yes, if that's wiped out, we're nothing but mechanical. But the next thing is that the whole function of myth is to unite these two orders of our nature, the mental nature, the waking consciousness nature, and that thing that takes over in sleep. When people have nightmares, it's principally because they have been repressing the biology, and it comes up with a vengeance. The deity that is disregarded turns into a devil, becomes negative, and nature then becomes feared if it has been suppressed long enough and you're out of accord with it, because of course it always is going to break up the quadrangular mode of planning that you've had for your life. Falling in love, there's nature coming, and my God, it's a wreck of many a program.
Yeah.
And the nature world, the wilderness world, it's a wonderful thing to meet, but then we've got to have the other one too, you see.
Yeah. Do you have any insights as to about how we as individuals can recover our contact with nature?
I think that's just a question of life planning, that you should put yourself in a situation so that you will have that refreshment from time to time. But if in your weekend or holiday you keep yourself in the world of enclosed, civilized living, then the nature is becoming starved inside you. And that's just individual planning, I think.
Yeah, my next question is related to what we've been talking about and how we've gotten out of balance. And I think you have something to say about this. And that is the quest for right living, the quest for doing something that's harmonious with our life, looking at our society, and again, looking at the past and from a mythical standpoint. That now we're in a place where usually most of our work is separated from our life. There are all these dichotomies, there are these splits built in. And yet if we look at history, if we look at the past, we can see that those people who got along the best seem to be those people who had a unity in their life, that their work was part of their life, it was unified, and now we have the splits. How do you see that?
Well, again, I can look at it only in terms of an individual, and I think the individual who takes a job in order to live for the money or something like that, he's turned himself into a slave. He's a money slave. And you might say work, it begins where you don't like what you're doing. I heard a little formula way back, make your hobby your source of income. Then there's no such thing as work, and there's no such thing as getting tired. It's been my own experience. I did just what I wanted to do. It takes a little courage at first because who the hell wants you to be doing just what you want to do? They've all got a lot of plans for you. But you can make it happen. And then there's no such thing as work. People say, when do you take a holiday? Well, a holiday's often just a bore because I'm not doing what I really want to do. No, I think that it's a very important thing for a young person to have the courage to do what seems to him significant in his life and not just take a job in order to make money. But this takes a bit of prudence and very careful planning and so forth, and may delay some of your achievements in the field of money and earning and comfortable living. But the ultimate result will be very much to your pleasure. But if you have a job, and it takes so much of your time, and at the same time you do have enough time left to do the development of your own system of ideas for the future, whatever it's going to be. And then the boss says, well, if you work 2 hours more, I'll give you more money. Then you say no. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's an early decision of courage to do the thing that it's your authentic drive. I think that's the path where there's no path, you know.
So dive into the deep water.
The gateless gate.
The unmapped.
Take the rap. But I found, I don't know how it is right now, because my days were a long way back, but in the 20s and 30s, there were plenty of marginal areas where you could incubate your destiny. I think they must still exist. I know a few of them.